Dr. Cuomo, I'm really looking forward to talking with you a little more in depth about your new book, and I've really been enjoying reading it. This is Copy, Crave, The Hidden Biology of Addiction and Cancer. And as we can see by your background, you are connected to UC San Diego School of Medicine. I know you're both a scientist and you're a professor and teach there. And before we kind of get into the book, maybe you could talk a little bit about what you do at the school, a little bit about your kind of scientific background and what you do in your teaching role.
Certainly. Well, first, thank you for having me. I am, as you said, a scientist and professor at the School of Medicine at the University of California, San Diego, where I run a research program that uses large-scale clinical data to understand how lifestyle, environment, and various other factors influence cancer risk and survival. So I have published more than 100 peer-reviewed scientific papers on topics that range from tobacco-related disparities to how metabolic health modifies cancer outcomes. In the classroom, I train physicians and scientists in advanced epidemiologic methods so that they can do their own studies. And in the community, I translate the science that I do for clinicians, for policymakers, and for the general public. So this book is an attempt for me to, in a way that's crafted so that the public can understand, regardless of your scientific background, a very important topic, as I believe is related to cancer risk.
Super. Well, I found the book both really scientifically sound, but also interesting and engaging, I think, for an educated lay audience. So maybe give us a short summary of the book and really what the highlights are that you're hoping to give to the people that read it and have read it, and how you what you want them to take away once they hopefully get into the book and read it more.
Certainly. So Crave argues that addiction is not confined to the brain, the ramifications of addiction, nor to obvious drugs that we associate presently with addiction. It is a whole body exposure that leaves what I call in the book molecular scars. These are measurable changes in hormones, immune signaling, and gene expression. What these scars do, they shape the internal environment, our body's internal environment, in which chronic diseases, including cancer, which I focus on in the book, take root. The main message that I try to convey in the book is intended to be a hopeful one, right? So the same biology that adapts to harmful repetition through subclinically addictive behaviors can adapt to healthier rhythms. And so small, consistent shifts in things like sleep, nutrition, movement, digital habits, which I write about in the book, can retrain the body toward resilience and toward reducing your risk of long-term chronic diseases.
Well, that's good, concise, I think, intro to the book. So I think, it's certainly true for me, and I think many people who grow up with concerns and fears about the big C, cancer, and, with my own background in health and addiction medicine, I know there's relationship between uh, addictions of all kinds, drugs and alcohol and other kinds of addictions and other kind of diseases and dysfunctions that people can experience. So it's, I think, one of the unique aspects of this book that you connect cancer with addiction. Even putting those two words together, I think, is pretty unusual. So, talk maybe a little bit about your work and interest in cancer, how you got interested in that field, and then where that overlapped with your experience with addictions, and how that then came together in this book.
Absolutely. So, I first noticed the connection between addiction and cancer because nearly every lifestyle factor that shifts our internal chemistry toward tumor growth seems to be powered by some sort of addictive inclination. Okay, the obvious culprits, such as nicotine and alcohol, are clearly on the list, right? Tobacco being, a huge risk modifier for cancer, and alcohol as well, being something that clearly the evidence says will increase your risk for developing many cancers. But so were late night screen time, and which steals sleep, and that has ramifications that will, in the long term, after repeated exposure, increase your risk of cancer. Ultra processed foods, engineered for bliss points, they keep you hooked on that, and that will increase risk for cancer. It's the stress that you experience because you're constantly notified at work because you're experiencing a lot of workplace stress or stress in your personal life. That also, there are addictions associated with that people gravitate towards, and that will increase your risk for cancer as well. And so when I assess the scientific literature for how these behaviors drive inflammation, insulin-like growth factors, and hormone imbalance, the pattern made it clear that addiction biology sits upstream of many cancer-promoting pathways. So the link remains hidden because society normalizes these behaviors, and medicine tends to study them in isolation, particularly those associated with drugs that you can overdose on. And we miss the facts oftentimes that the same reward circuitry for these other behaviors, other addictive behaviors, are pulling the strings behind what's driving cancer risk. So once we view the cluster of addictive behaviors as one systemic exposure, prevention becomes clear and also more hopeful because again, we are what we repeat. We are able to normalize not just the adverse effects of of adverse addictions, but also we can have an internal environment that is shaped by positive behaviors as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I think I've shared with you my background both in addiction medicine and also this emerging field of gender-specific healthcare, and I focus on men's health issues. And I know that from reading the book, this is of interest and would be helpful to men and women, but I think it's particularly helpful for men. We know that men as a group, have higher levels of both disease generally, often have higher levels and earlier onset of many diseases, including cancer. And I wonder if you can kind of hone in on maybe some of the things that might specifically apply to guys. If we were talking to a men's group or a group of guys who both not only are these issues more prevalent, but often men as a group are less likely to seek intervention earlier, tend to be, lone wolves. I can handle it myself, or I'm too busy, or all the things that guys tend to do to deny or put off getting help. What might you say to men that might in interest them and maybe get a few guys that are watching this to go check out your book?
Well, one thing I would tell them is that, well, first of all, men suffer higher rates of most addictions, as you mentioned, and often delay preventive care, which is an issue, of course. What I would tell a room full of guys is that the book is not about blaming anyone, blaming you for poor behaviors. That's not what this book is about. That's not the message I'm trying to convey. And it's not about completely abstaining from the things you enjoy either. It's about leverage. It's about knowing something, and because you know something, you have power over it. If you know how addiction rewires your stress hormones, testosterone balance, immune surveillance, these other kinds of things that will influence your risk of disease, of suffering from a disease, you can engineer routines in your life that protect your mood, protect your muscle, protect your longevity. So you can think of it as performance science, right? Better rhythm in your life means better sleep. It means better workouts, lower cancer risk without having to give up every pleasure. It's about control and having, control over, whether or not you're going to end up suffering from a disease. So I think that framing, is would I think be appealing to a lot of guys, and I try to weave it into the book as well.
Yeah, well spoken. Maybe before we move on, maybe you could just talk a little bit more about the performance aspect of health, because I think guys uh, really respond to some really specific connections and technologies between being fit, being able to do the things that we love to do, being able to perform, whether it's at work or at home, and our relationships at the highest level, and that these things, not only that you teach people about the problems in the book, but the rewiring, the way we can change our performance abilities, standards, and results. Say a little bit more about that, perhaps, at this point.
Absolutely. Well, it's something that motivates me as well. I don't like to think that the things that I'm doing on a day-to-day basis are kind of resulting in the interior of my body and my cells becoming degraded and worse off and just, in a state of being that's going to lead to my disability in the long term because I get cancer or heart disease or just, effects of other kinds of bodily processes that are going to result in my inability to do the things that I was once able to do. I think that we recognize as a society that the behaviors that we engage in, exercise, eating right, doing these things, they are going to protect us. That's true. But we have to think upstream from that, I think. We have to think, well, our mindset is driving that. I'm going to end up, doing something unhealthy if I feel so inclined to do it because I have this kind of addiction that I haven't broken. So recognizing first that that inclination exists, that powerful addictive drive to do those things that are going to mess you up on the inside, recognizing that that addiction exists is, I think, step one. And I think we ignore a lot of that oftentimes. We go straight to, let's forget about how my mindset is when I think about this behavior. We go straight to, oh, I'll just do the behavior. And then we end up unable to do it consistently or, think in a way that's clear about our healthy habits. And again, I think that's going to end up leading us to being unable to do things in the long term.
Yeah. And I think, at least from my experience working with people in my own life, it seems to me there are two main things in the area that you're describing that cause problems or get in the way of men or women as well, taking advantage of these upstream uh, problem-solving techniques before you have an issue. The first is I don't think we tend to associate some of the larger addiction patterns with cancer. I mean, it took us a long time just to recognize that something like cigarettes, has a connection to cancer. So it's that's one problem. That see that addictions are broader than just what we might think about as cigarette problems. The other is that you're a younger guy. I'm an older guy, particularly compared to you. I'm a bit older. And I think the other barrier is that when people of your age and younger, think about cancer, you kind of think of it as I did when I was younger. Well, that's something for old people to worry about. And, yeah, maybe, if I don't take care of myself eventually. But when you're young, when you're in your 20s, 30s, even 40s, I'm 82. So now I see, friends that are dying that have those kind of problems. So I think if we can recognize that addictions are more than just cigarettes, in the area of things we might put in our bodies, and uh, helping ourselves live healthier, fuller, more productive lives, even if we don't want to worry about cancer or things that you might more likely get when you're older. This is going to help you just live better, enjoy life more in the now. So I just want to make, that comment. And I, as you know, have been working in the addiction field since 1968. I wrote a number of articles back in the day where I tried to do two things that I'm still talking about, and your book helps illustrate. And the first is that The way we have tended to treat addictions by this very narrow focus on just either brain chemistry or even before that, when I was in the field, we were talking more about the substance. There were addictive substances, and we learned about, why heroin is addictive or why cigarettes are addictive. And that was not, I think it was too narrow an approach then, and it's still a narrow approach that I think we need to expand and broaden our view, which I think you do very well. And maybe talk a little bit about your understanding of the limitations we have both in the health field generally, whether we're talking about cancer or other diseases, and in the way in which the addiction fields overlap, and why it's important for what you say in your book and for us in the public to learn a wider, a more larger systemic perspective.
Yeah. So I think you're absolutely right. So traditional addiction models tend to center on dopamine and your personal choice, right? And they underplay these other effects like cortisol, insulin, circadian disruptions, social architecture, and how those things can be both caused by an addiction to one of these maladaptive behaviors, as well as feeding those behaviors and limiting your resilience toward the addictive behaviors. And this narrow view leads us to programs that chase symptoms, things like drug substitution or brief counseling, while leaving the environment that provokes the craving unchanged. What this book tries to do is integrate the neuroscience with immunology, endocrinology, sociology, and others, which offers a holistic blueprint that treats the person and the ecosystem together, right? So it is not just looking at, hey, you have this drug addiction, you go on a nicotine patch and you'll get off it. It's not that. We have to think more holistically about the kinds of drivers of the addiction as well as the ramifications of addictive behaviors that we wouldn't normally think about.
Yeah, and I think one of the things you point out, some people have heard of dopamine, a neurotransmitter that, is involved in the seeking behaviors that we have and, looking for pleasurable experiences and such. We've learned about sugar and we've learned about other things that that trigger craving. But one of the things that I think you address in the book that I don't see very often in the literature is the devices that we all are. Uh, they're so ubiquitous now. We don't even think of them as anything that could be harmful. Everybody's got a smartphone. Everybody's got some kind of a digital device or a tablet or a way of, staying in touch. And it's become just part of our lives. And yet, like so many other things that are part of our lives, there's upsides and there's downsides. And you talk, I believe, in the book, you have a chapter talking about digital dopamine. And if I got this right, you say the connection to cancer is not always direct. Digital behavior does not cause tumors in the way a carcinogen might, but it contributes to the environment in which tumors are more likely to grow. So, talk a little bit about just that notion of digital dopamine and why it's really been hidden and why it's important that we surface that reality so that we can hopefully take both preventive action and take action to heighten our awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are suffering from an addiction to our devices, and uh, you know, I think this is well illustrated in kind of social media feeds. I think that we go through a social media feed looking for something interesting, and then we find it, and that's fantastic, and that promotes us looking further and further for other interesting things. And we're just swiping and swiping, and we keep on doing this, and it's an addictive behavior, and we're kind of stuck and glued to our phones. That can do certain things, that can have certain ramifications. It can flatten melatonin signaling, right? And melatonin has various different effects. In addition to its well-known impact on our ability to fall asleep, it also has antioxidant effects in the body, and that will, when repeated over time, over a consistent period of time, can have effects that will promote tumor growth. There are other things as well. So we are constantly notified by our phones and receive notifications all the times, and that will spike cortisol. Our inability to sleep as well will spike cortisol. So we have things, these kind of micro stresses that we will experience very frequently as a result of our digital addictions will flatten melatonin. They will fragment sleep. They will raise inflammatory markers and inflammation. Sorry, our immune system's ability to repair DNA is very important. Our immune system's ability to clear mutated cells is very important for our ability to prevent cancer. And so one thing that is underappreciated um, about many of these addictive behaviors and their influence on cancer is their impact on the immune system, because the immune system, again, is very important for preventing cancer. So screens, they won't plant tumors directly, of course, but they will cultivate an internal environment in which mutated cells are less likely to be cleared. So these devices are ubiquitous. We socially reward people who are able to use them well, but the harm does fly under the radar. We want to make digital behavior uh, healthier. We don't want it to promote diseases. So I think we need to better understand the influence of our relationship with digital devices on long-term disease risk, and then move toward having, developing some understanding of how we can have a better relationship that will not promote disease. So that is something I try to capture in the book through that chapter, yes.
Yeah. Well, one of the things, to just kind of piggyback on what you're saying that I do in my kind of mode of addiction counseling and preventive counseling is uh, people who come to me. Actually, I just had a client earlier today um, who is very obvious to what would happen to be a woman who talked about problems she's having in her life, and it's very clear that she both had some substance issues and was aware of it. She uh, uh, talked about her use of methamphetamines. So if somebody is, continuously using methamphetamines or heroin, they're aware that they may not want to stop. They may be saying, well, no, I can handle it, I can control it, but they're at least aware that it's going on. And I think there's a couple of aspects to these broader addictions or digital addictions because they exist in a context of a business system or an economic system or a larger systemic system that uses the brain science that we know to get people hooked on. In the case of digital addiction, they want people to come back. They want people to engage. They want you to stay involved with the screen because that's how you sell people, whether it's advertising or get them to pay attention to something that you want to sell. So all these little that we think of as reminders, all the little bings and dings and things that tell us you've got mail or tell us you have a message. In our brain chemistry, they register as a threat. They register as, ooh, there's something I got to pay attention to. And that feedback loop in the brain makes us more likely then to react negatively. And that's part of where you talk about the disruption of so many of our health systems. So maybe you could talk a little bit about the broader context in which digital addictions take place. So, for instance, when I talk about people who say, no, I can handle it, whether it's alcohol or nicotine or food addictions or digital, I say, do a little experiment for anything you watch or do all the time, whether it's watching TV, anything. take a break, just take, a day or two or a week and don't engage. And people who even, when you say don't look at your cell phone for, it can be even an hour for some people, more or less a day or a week. So maybe talk a little bit about not only the personal difficulty that most of us have because they're so ubiquitous and we so believe we've got to have it, but the larger systems that have an interest in keeping us hooked.
Yeah, so in the book, what I talk about is a kind of new prevention approach. Okay. And this is a kind of radically redefining prevention of disease prevention from something that focuses on the behavior to something that goes upstream to focusing on our mindset. And I believe that the systems that we have in place for looking at addiction are not adequately taking into account our mindset, especially for these subclinical addictions that I talk about in the book, right? I think we are, um, addressing addiction in a much more addictive mindset in a much more clear way for things like nicotine addiction, but we disregard that kind of mindset approach for a lot of other behaviors, which we know are going to be associated with long-term disease risk. So this new prevention moves upstream from habits to the mindset that drives them. Rather than counting calories, steps, or hours online, we first have to examine the craving-oriented lens that makes certain choices feel rewarding. So this involves marketing, that's things that are marketed to us, social cues, past stress that teaches the brain to see stimulation as relief, such as the digital stimulation we have. So interventions on individuals as well as populations, we have to rewrite these associations through cognitive training, social support, and policy nudges as well that shift default expectations. Okay. When perception changes, healthier behaviors emerge with less friction. And the inflammatory and hormonal signals I talk about in the book that favor cancer will diminish, before harmful routines can take hold.
Indeed. Yeah, I think if more people got that, I think we would all be better off. And so, what I want to just ask you more personally, because I've worked in the field for a long time. I feel like I've learned a lot that's been helpful. Certainly, the clients that I see, helpful in the classes that I teach, but also helpful in my own life. I mean, I recognize, as I'm sure you do as well, that even when we know this stuff, even when we're trained, even when it isn't always easy to put it into practice and to, you know, deal with, because so much of the environment that we live in, is pushing in the other direction. It's like swimming upstream in some way. And maybe you could share a little personally about kind of your own, life experience. When you're off camera or out of the scientific realm or writing papers or teaching and training, but you're just, you're living your own life. You're doing your own things. You're out, with friends and so on. What have you noticed in terms of your own life that one you've put into practice based on what you learned when you actually put all this information into the book? Because I know when I've written 17 books, I know one of the reasons I write them is to teach me something or help me be aware of something that I can now practice what I preach. But I also recognize, and I'm sure you do too, it isn't always easy. There's some difficulties. So maybe talk a little personally about what you've experienced in terms of, what you've put into practice in your own life and where maybe some of the areas that were difficult to actually practice, even though you knew, what you should do.
Absolutely. So I think the thing about this book is it deals with so many different behaviors. I think everyone will have something that resonates with them. You don't have to have an addiction to tobacco or alcohol to learn from about the addictions you have that I talk about in the book. So, like many people, I also feel that same urge to do things that I shouldn't do, right? So I feel like eating ultra processed foods, that does occur as well with me. I feel like staying up late sometimes. I feel like having perhaps more coffee than I should sometimes. I feel these urges like others. And I don't advocate in the book for complete abstinence of, certain behaviors. I don't say people should completely stop using their phones, completely stop, consuming caffeine, or completely stop giving yourself a treat once in a while, a food treat. Um, these things are fine on occasion. The problem, as I think you alluded to, is that people will um, have a problem breaking away from those behaviors. Okay. And sometimes in my life, I've noticed this as well. I've gotten so engrossed in a particular kind of habit, maybe at work, for example, or using my phone way too much to check on things all the time, that I try to recognize when that occurs and take a step back once in a while and say, okay, am I developing an unhealthy relationship with, checking up on what's going on in this particular area at work? And if so, maybe I can find a way to take a little break from that and focus on other things, because it's become so pervasive in my mind. I just can't stop obsessing about that. So I think trying to be reflective in our life about what kind of our relationships with food, our relationships with our phones, our work, our, substances that may not be obviously addictive. Trying to be reflective about this, and then admitting to yourself, hey, maybe I should take a little break. Maybe I should step back for a day. Maybe I should find a way to kind of just ease off of this for a little while. I think doing that is very helpful. It has helped me. And then that, again, that does not mean that you completely stop with that behavior. You can go back to it and have a healthier relationship with food, with work, with other things in your life. And that will, I think, not only lead to more happiness in a person's life, but also a better sense of control over your own life, as well as decreased risk of these terrible diseases in the long term. So I think the book is kind of a wake up sign for a lot of people with regard to the kinds of behaviors, but it's also a call to more closely examine your own mindset around your relationship with a variety of different things in your life.
That's good advice and good support. And, before we wind up getting towards the end of our time today, but I'd just be curious, again, to follow up a little more personally, that, um, I look back on the period of life when I was in college myself, when I was the age of the students that you have. And it seemed, as I look back on it, to be a simpler time. I went to, I was in the UC system. I went to UC Santa Barbara in 1961. So that's when I was a student. I was a graduate student, after that. And looking back, I look at those times as being a lot less stressful, the world a lot less chaotic than it seems to be now. And I'm wondering, just when you think about yourself, when you were the age of your students, what's changed for, in those years for you? You're a little closer to the age of your students than I am, but it seems to me that from the my own children and grandchildren, I see a lot more difficulties, particularly with the males. Like I say, I work a lot with gender issues. I just wonder what you're noticing, if anything that you can report on, reflecting from the time you were a student compared to what you're seeing with the students that you see now.
Well, this is less to do with the book, but I think that
Yeah.
one thing that I am seeing a lot with a lot of students nowadays is a lot of concern about the economic situation, ability of the students to um, to survive financially and to get jobs and so forth. So I think that is a major concern. It's driving a lot of stress for a lot of people in the younger generation. I think that we were all concerned when I was in college. We were concerned about that as well. And every generation has its concerns, but I think
Sure.
that that in particular has, objectively gotten harder with cost of living going up as they have. What I will say is that I think as objectively troubling as a lot of, things are for students that are in the college age or graduate school where I teach a similar age group, I think that every generation has its challenges. And in the moment, I feel like a lot of the things that we face feel like they are catastrophic, but they tend to pass. And I think when we look back at the time, we think about it as a simpler time, and perhaps it was, but part of it is also because the moment, the very moment, feels so in your face that it feels so much more catastrophic and pressing by comparison. But
Mhm.
I think it's helpful to remember that this moment will pass as well, and one day we'll sit in the future looking back at this as something that just came and went. And I think we will, we are strong as humanity, as a species. We will be able to get through these challenges and then move forward and be better overall. Both as individuals, we become better, we learn, and as a society, I think that, despite any kind of backsliding that may occur in the short term, I think overall, long term, we're going to do better. We're going to build a healthier society, a more prosperous society for ourselves, for our children, and I am hopeful for the continued progress of humanity, both in the areas of health where I work and in other areas as well.
Well, super. Well, I just want to again let people at least see the cover. It's a cool cover. Crave, the hidden biology of addiction and cancer. Maybe you could just tell people, if they want to find the book, where they can find it, if they want to find out more about your work and where you hang out, how they can learn more about you and what you're doing these days.
Absolutely. So, Crave, The Hidden Biology of Addiction and Cancer is available on Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, and independent bookstores, both in print and in ebook. I usually just recommend people go to Amazon. It's very straightforward to get it there. It's also on Google as an audiobook if you want that version as well. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. That's where a lot of people follow my work and my updates. You can learn a little bit more about me on my website, rafaelcuomo.com. And you can also get additional updates about my research on my UC San Diego faculty page. If you just Google my name, that should be one of the first things to come up. So
Super.
yeah,
Well, thank you so much. I'll we'll wrap up for today, and stay on for a minute, and we'll just chat after we finish our little formal talk and discussion. So, thank you again for being part of the podcast, and let's do stay in touch.
thanks, Jed.